Okay, we're going to start up right away, and the next session is SMAC, Strategies in Outsourcing, Driving Organizational Success. So SMAC stands for, who knows that? Social, mobility, analytics, and cloud. I'd like to introduce the moderator of the panel, Raj Mahali. Raj, are you somewhere here? Yeah, good. We're getting wired up? Okay. So as you're doing that, I'll introduce you a little short, quick CV. He is a partner at Cozen O'Connor Corporate Law Department and has been for several years in the New York office. He's extensive experience in emerging markets, particularly in South Asia and the Middle East. Raj's experience includes representing investment funds, hedge funds, and a plethora of financial organizations. He structured several M&A, private equity, and venture capital deals in manufacturing, engineering, and the chemical industries. His clients are from a number of Fortune 1000 companies, emerging growth technology companies, Tier 1 BPO companies, sovereign wealth funds, and private equities firms. Raj was ranked, what were you ranked? One of the top corporate M&A attorneys in the U.S. and India in Chambers Global 2013. That enough? All right, let's go.
Should we commence? Is the mic on? Can you hear me? Thank you. Thank you, everyone. My name is Raj Mahali. I'm a partner at Cozen O'Connor. I want to first of all thank Karthik and the World BPO Forum for inviting me to moderate this panel. We have three esteemed speakers today. I have Shiv Kumar, who's the Global Head of Strategic Growth at EXL Service, Inc. I have Daniel Aguilar, who is the Senior Director of Supplier Strategy IT at Microsoft. And I have Keith Zucchini, who's the CIO of Parsons Brinckerhoff. For today's panel, I think we're going to have a discussion format, and we'll save the Q&A, 10 to 15-minute Q&A at the end. Before I commence and give you some data points on SMAC, I just want to take a quick poll. How many of you know what SMAC is? Can I get a show of hands? It's about 20%. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. To be very candid with you guys, that was not part of my vernacular a year ago. So I was representing a Fortune 500 company. We had an MSA to negotiate. The senior VP of procurement, Sarah, she's a wonderful lady. I got to tell you this story. She said to me, before we get into the whole MSA and the term sheet and all that, we really need to focus on the innovation fund. And we're going to partner up with our vendor, and here's a roadmap. And she started talking about, we got to discuss SMAC strategies, SMAC this, SMAC that. And I was like, okay, I hung up. We had a call later on that day with the vendor and their counsel. And I said, she's ready to talk SMAC. She's going to talk SMAC. I got a little worried. I go, wait a second. I don't know what I'm talking about. I know what she's talking about. It's not going to be a productive phone call. So luckily, my neighbor at the firm is an IP partner, and I said, what's this SMAC all about? And he goes, let me enlighten you. So he spent the time and enlightened me, so I was thankful. Let me talk about a few data points before we get into our discussion. The roadmap of 2014 and beyond for SMAC. With more than 24 billion interconnected devices by 2020, SMAC will present a business opportunity of more than $1 trillion during the same period. Gartner predicts that by 2017, the SMAC stack will drive more than 26% of the total enterprise software market revenue, an increase from 12% from 2013, which represents over $104 billion in new revenue from the stack. SMAC, let me get into what SMAC stands for as well, and give you some data points. Social media, the S for SMAC. 25% of the people on this planet use social media. This number is increasing very rapidly. In the emerging economies, this growth is more than 100% year over year, which is pretty incredible. Mobile, there's about 7 billion people living in the world, 6.2 billion mobile subscribers. By 2017, there'll be more than 10 billion mobile devices, which will be roughly 1.5 times of the world's population at that time. Analytics. Analytics means scientific and systematic analysis of data. As per Forrester, 2014 is going to be a very big year for big data. The unprecedented growth of unstructured data at 41% from year on year has created an enormous business opportunity for enterprises. And by 2015, the global big data market size will reach 25 billion. And finally, cloud, the C. Simple meaning of cloud in the context of SMAC is using software applications as a service without buying them. International Data Corporation predicts that the public cloud services revenue will grow 26.4% year over year until 2016, and the private cloud services revenue will grow at 50% year over year in 2016. So these are some interesting data points, and I'd like to start our panel discussion. I'd like to introduce Shiv Kumar, who from EXL is one of the top tier service providers, and to get your thoughts, Shiv, please.
Sure. Thank you, Raj. My name is Shiv Kumar. I'm responsible for all the major strategic initiatives for EXL Service, which is a NASDAQ-listed pure play business process management and outsourcing firm based in New York, with global delivery centers out of Eastern Europe, India, Philippines, and a few other emerging locations which are in the hopper. And thank you, Raj, for giving the context on SMAC. And before I pass on to my colleagues, my 2 cents on SMAC is basically all about demystifying the layers of what we live through every day, which is all about social media, smartphones, and trying to combine analytics and cloud to those to see what are the use cases in terms of applicability and what kind of outcomes are shaping today's enterprises using the SMAC stack. So we'll delve more on it after we have the introductions.
Great, and I'm Danielle Aguilar. I work in Microsoft's IT organization. I lead our supplier strategy team. So many of you are customers or go-to-market partners with us. I don't represent that side today. I really come as a consumer of outsourced services, really deciding on what types of work we want to outsource, who we partner with, how we find the right engagement models with those partners. And Microsoft is not the big software giant that you've known in the past. Our business model has changed significantly with SMAC. Absolutely. And we really are a devices and services company that leads with a cloud-first, mobile-first strategy. And that has a lot of implications in what you're seeing from us in your interactions in the market or as customers, but it has a lot of impacts on how we work internally. And there's been some big changes that hit us, especially in the IT organization. And it's been an interesting journey. It's how do we work differently? How do we work in a social environment? How do we get off email and work out loud on social? And how do we then think about what we want to outsource? How we think about partnerships differently and how we structure those relationships. So there's some really interesting new opportunities with our partners, as well as some new challenges for them, for us, as we kind of grow and learn how to partner in this space for further develop.
My name is Keith Zucchini. I'm the CIO for a company called Parsons Brinckerhoff. Parsons Brinckerhoff is an infrastructure company, but not in the sense of what most in the room will think about when they think infrastructure. When we talk infrastructure, we're talking real infrastructure: bridges, tunnels, roadways, airports, trains. I founded about 130 years ago right here in New York City with the delivery of the New York City subway. So we built the original subway. And I'd like to introduce Parsons Brinckerhoff by asking where people live. If you're from Seattle, the Alaskan Way Viaduct is ours. Right. If you're from Boston, the Big Dig was ours. At least the successful part of the Big Dig. Yeah, exactly. The less successful part of the Big Dig was one of our competitors, but the good parts were ours. So yeah, airports, things you get to work on probably is what we do. Social for us is a little bit different, just starting with social, a couple of areas covered with SMAC. But social for us is a little different because we don't deal much with consumers directly. Our clients are governments, federal, state, or even local governments is where we get the funding for the big infrastructure projects. So we're usually not interfacing directly with consumers, but we do have a lot of interest in how the consumers are impacted by our projects. For instance, we did the Bay Bridge in San Francisco, and we were responsible for maintaining traffic flow information to consumers and having a mobile app that would alert consumers of what lane closures were being done, what the traffic flow issues were going to be that day. So it's a little bit different from what most people think of with social, but there's some of the challenges that we're talking in our business.
Thank you, Keith. So Shiv, let me start with you as a service provider. What are the key strategic initiatives is EXL looking at when it comes to SMAC?
Sure. I would like to kind of preface that with a reference to what I noticed in Lee's presentation in the morning, a small blurb from Professor Clay Christensen of Harvard Business School, where he very clearly stated that the biggest impediment or the challenge to adoption of anything new and disruptive like a SMAC or a robotic is really the status quo and the comfort zone the enterprises today are enjoying on their current operating metrics, which makes them believe that they are competitive, they're doing great, and they're going to do better. But that probably is the biggest headwind in terms of adoption and fast tracking of some of these disruptive technologies like robotics, artificial intelligence-led new tools, and SMAC stacks. So in line with that theme, some of the organizations which are really fast tracking this and evangelizing this within the organizations, like EXL today as a leading global service provider, what we are trying to do is we are actually giving targets to our service delivery leaders in terms of how much revenues they can cannibalize by adopting some of these disruptive technologies. So the savings can be quantified, amplified, and given back to the clients in a much more measurable, tangible way by actually cannibalizing their existing revenue stream and reducing their revenue metrics. This is something really disruptive for a service provider to really measure a service delivery leader by saying that if you're doing 10 million with that client, you got to basically do only 8 million next year because you're using so much of technology, and that's the benefit that's going back to the client, which will result in much larger revenue share because we're going to do a lot more by passing on those benefits. So that's just one example at a philosophical level is what we are trying to do. So getting to the more detailed level, demystifying stack, the stack of SMAC, in terms of real use case applications and appliances, we start with the basics of managing the data for some of our clients. From a service provider lens, it's all about disaggregating the clutter and really making sense of the noise and looking at some signals, pattern recognition, and putting that all into intelligent data sets that can be used for meaningful decision making and tangible business outcomes, which can be measured, managed, and sustained over a period of time by the service provider in partnership with the client. So which is why in very, very many matured enterprises, you'll see the adoption of SMAC manifesting in the form of new positions of Chief Data Officer, Chief Digitization Officer, Chief Data Mart Officer. So all kinds of new titles are coming up. But essentially the job is to put it all together into one unified repository, all the best practices that are required to further fine-tune and evangelize the concept of marrying the signals from social media, from mobile, from analytics, and making it internet-enabled across the world so that the consumers and the users have a much better experience in terms of customer satisfaction or looking at product adoption or looking at evangelizing anything new that the company is doing. So I'll get further into the use cases once I have the other colleagues weigh in with their perspectives on the SMAC.
I like that you brought out the perspective of it's more of an integrated solution. I was thinking back as I was preparing for this to a couple of years ago where we really were thinking, what is my sourcing strategy for social? What is my sourcing strategy for analytics? You know, and we were thinking of those as separate technologies or services that we needed to get. And now we've progressed to it's really thinking about, you know, SMAC is integrated in every solution we have. From an IT perspective, we're not looking at individual projects, but we're really looking at that connected end-to-end user experience. And that changes what we want from partners, right? Mm-hmm. It's not just, hey, I have a set of specs and I need you to develop it, deliver it, and I want to move that to managed services. Right. But really, I need you now to understand these technologies as well or better than me, so you can really help accelerate how we go to market. So I don't have to know all the answers anymore. I want to leverage you to be successful in the market, help accelerate it, both internally and externally. And so that really is, you know, that the innovation we keep talking about throughout these last 2 days becomes a lot more critical. And then there's new technologies and there's new business process focus that we need to learn with our partners as well. Yeah,
I agree. And I think also in how you buy the services you know, from an ITO perspective, we're also looking heavily at the bring your own phenomena, getting out of providing people with mobile devices and eventually desktops and laptops, and just saying, look, whatever you want to use to get to your data and to your applications, we're okay with that. But that puts a new lens on how we're buying our service support, for instance, from an IT outsourcer, because suddenly it's not a standard image, it's not standard delivery of applications. It can be absolutely anything that you're dealing with when you're talking to an end user. And I think that's going to bring a new challenge in how we're buying the IT outsourcing services, particularly around service support.
So Keith, on that topic, in your perspective, and the BYO, as you mentioned, how is it being adopted?
We're starting slow with, we've used our own acronym, BYOM, which is Bring Your Own Mobile Device.
Right.
Partly because of the uncertainty of the BlackBerry platform in the coming years. We're doing away with the entitlement of everybody gets a BlackBerry. I like to joke that we have a very strict policy of who got a BlackBerry. You only got one if you asked for it. And therefore, everybody was given a BlackBerry when they joined the company. And we don't want to invest in the back-end infrastructure, so we're just saying, look, people now want iPhones, they want Samsungs, or Galaxies, whatever. So let's get away from the entitlement and providing something that's a dictate, and starting with the bring your own. Tablet obviously is an adjunct to that, but I think we're a year or two away from moving to that model for laptops and desktops, and saying, look, let's stop fighting the arguments of whether it's HP or Dell or Apple or Wintel. Let's just give people a stipend. Here's an amount each year to go and buy what you want and use what you want.
Thank you, Keith.
So on a related note on that, Keith, just as you're talking about bring your own mobile and making sure that you get kind of declutter most of the devices so that there's one single device that basically is the medium of communication. Yep. There are several disruptive innovators which are going to be basically coming up with the slogan, email-free office. And that one big example is Atos Origin, which is a multi-billion-dollar European IT services company. They have proclaimed that by end of 2014, their organization worldwide will be email-free, which means that the productivity is expected to go up by more than 25-30%, because they're not going to be bogged down for 3 to 4 hours on an average, which they're getting bogged down today on emails. And the way they remediated that is by actually building a social networking platform which is within the firewalls of the company, for them to do all the internal collaborations in a very intelligent and productive manner, wherein the social networking engine basically is algorithm driven, that picks up all the keywords of the message and makes sure that it is directed to the right function, right organization within the company, to the right stakeholder. And it has its own intelligence, which of course has been developed heuristically and then supported by some algorithmic rules, wherein the work allocation, task allocation, completion, notification, triggers, alerts, all that is automated to an extent where the productivity is phenomenally higher compared to what you do on the email clutters with multiple CCs and BCCs and forwards and irrelevant, traffic that gets generated. So they have figured out and they've cracked the code on this social networking platform that completely eliminates emails and improves the productivity. So that's one great use case, how SMAC Impact internally can actually improve the productivity.
Shiv, what was the name of the company again?
It's called Atos.
I'm going to go talk to my CEO right away. Email-free environment. Oh man, that's a lawyer's dream.
It's really interesting though, because we at Microsoft are going through a similar journey. We don't have a goal to get rid of email by the end of fiscal year 14. That might be good. But we use Yammer to collaborate socially, and it's been really cool. Like during this conference, you go to a conference like this. Normally, I'd come home and I'd type up a bunch of takeaways and email that out to people. But on my mobile phone, I've been able to just go in versus Yammer during different presentations and just share a couple key takeaways, right? And so it's really cool, but it is a big cultural shift. You have to get, what we do in email, we're used to having very private, right? And it's the same dynamic within your company, but also with your partners, right? You kind of prepare the message you want them to have.
Right.
And social is much more working out loud. And you have to change the culture either within your company or with your partners to work out loud. You have to... We've had great results on code development. Product development cycle just reduced really dramatically because people can post code up there. Hey, does anyone have any ideas on how to do this? And we're starting to implement that with our outsourced partners as well.
So it becomes more about knowledge management and knowledge sharing.
Right.
Interesting project I'll share with you is we recently completed a tunnel under the Bosphorus River in Istanbul. Fascinating project, connecting 2 continents with a tunnel. Very unique project and some very unique challenges. If you're a tunneling engineer, a tunneling expert, this is a once in a lifetime, once in a career opportunity to get involved in something like that. So we're finding ways to tap into our alumni network, people that may have retired from the company who are, I hope I don't offend anybody, but bridge engineers, tunnel engineers are pretty boring people. They're very smart people, but they're boring. When they retire, these are people that make accountants seem interesting or fascinating. But when they retire, they sit at home and they're thinking about that fabulous project they worked on. So trying to tap into the alumni using social media, social techniques to have them say, hey, look, that project I read about, that's very similar to something I worked on 40 years ago, and some of the ventilation challenges you had for that tunnel project are very similar. So there's some opportunities to, again, use social in a non-consumer facing way in that example to tap the alumni network.
Great.
So shifting a little bit of focus, let's talk about what's driving your organizational success, Shiv. What are the key drivers at EXL that you're looking at?
Right. So our solution to use the SMAC for our customers, large enterprises, Fortune 500, Global 2000 companies, is really predicated on two premises. One, deep domain expertise on that particular industry micro vertical. When we say micro vertical, we actually go 10 layers below the vertical. It's not enough to just say we are gurus of insurance. It's very important for us to get into the underneath layers of property casualty insurance or life insurance and go several layers down to that micro specialized area where we believe our data-driven approach, our analytical capabilities will come into fore, and with the deep domain expertise, with some of the tools and frameworks that we deploy, are able to help our customers come up with some really outlier kind of a situation for them to take the decision. So we basically spot the outliers in our customers' business using very powerful analytical tools, which could be a combination of descriptive, instructive, prescriptive, or predictive modeling approaches, or third-party tools which we customize for that specific domain. And kind of threading to some of the conversations that we had in the morning on robotics. Robotics is actually going into new frontiers of automation. We call it autonomics, where it's basically synthesis of automation, analytics, robotics, all coming together in a way which kind of is mirroring the mapping of the brain into those tools and frameworks, which is driving your workflow. And we do all those interventions into our BPO and analytics workflow in such a way that this typical OCR, which is your classical scanning indexing software, today is being replaced by very sophisticated add-ons to the wrappers, what we call a CBOR, which is content-based object recording, which is an intelligence embedded to the OCR for workflow allocation, rapid scanning and indexing, and also populating the data fields very intelligently in a manner where it can take away several FTE worth of work through that layer of automation. So there's a lot of disruptive interventions that we bring into a workflow as a BPO provider, combined with the modeling capabilities and the domain capabilities of that industry. Putting it all together, the framework really drives very high degree of productivity and output back to the client in a manner which was unthinkable probably 18 months back in a conventional BPO environment, which is basically mirroring the customer's workflow and processing it at a cheaper way.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. Danielle, can you shed some light on that as well?
As far as key success factors?
Please.
I look at it in a couple dimensions. One is what we internally need to do.
Right.
So there is a lot of change management with IT. I look at what our suppliers need to do and what we need to do together as far as how we partner. So from an IT perspective, there's a lot of shifting. In the past, if you wanted to get at some analytics or have some data, you have the business group, put some requirements, feed the request into IT, you go through whatever your internal planning cycle was and prioritization, and you'd have a bunch of engineers go out and develop a data warehouse and deliver it back to the customer, who may or may not get the information they really wanted out of that.
Right.
Now, with big data, with analytics tools, we, from an IT perspective, aren't building those big data warehouses, right? We're building a central data marketplace where anyone in the company can access the different data sources. We're giving them the Power BI tools to light those up themselves, and then we're allowing them to go after the analytics themselves. And we're using partners to help us accelerate. We're using partners to help us market that service.
Right.
But that challenges the roles and the identity that a lot of people within the IT group have. So we have to help us with that change.
Right.
And then it's a change in thinking for our suppliers too, right? They're not just order takers, which they haven't been for years, but it is a new dimension of they have to run a service on our behalf and giving them that autonomy. And then it's a difference in the relationships. It's not so much here's the contract, here's my SLAs, let's sit down and measure them once a month, but it's really how do we still keep that quality, still
Right.
keep that service level, the supplier management, but give us room to do things like Scrum and Agile development, as well as kind of intake that innovation.
Sure.
Because I think half the time we don't get the innovation is because
Sure.
we're not open to it, even
Sure.
though we say we are.
Sure. Thank you.
Key success factor?
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
one for us for analytics, I'll use a simpler example, simpler than tunnels in Istanbul. We also do highways, and highways there are fewer variables. Highways are typically bid by how many miles, how many lanes, how many interchanges. So being able to use analytics to get better estimates, better intel on our competitors, and particularly when we lost a highway, what's our price per mile of a highway bid, or price per mile of a rail project. A lot of that information is public record, so being able to go to the municipalities that funded the project, you know exactly how much has been spent to deliver or to build a rail system, for example, and being able to use that information to help us get better info and better intelligence on our pricing. It comes down to the success factor of did we win more work. So using analytics to help us win work is I think, the pinnacle of success factors.
Now, are you using external service providers, or are you doing this in-house?
A bit of both right now. We're I would call it piloting some of these concepts right now. So we're looking for some market leaders to help us figure out how best to do it.
So I'm dealing with, on a legal perspective, this whole concept of innovation funds. And so on the MSA perspective, the service provider and the customers coming together to work out the details of what they're calling a partnership or innovation fund dealing with SMAC. And it's been a challenge because I see a lot of that not being totally thought through until it gets to the MSA stage, and that becomes a nightmare for us. My key takeaway for that would be, and I'd like to get your thoughts from the supplier side as well as the provider side and the client side. Are these concepts being thought through at an earlier stage? What are you looking at partnering up with a service provider, and what are you looking at partnering up with a client?
Right.
On SMACs.
So if I were to demystify SMAC, and again, SMAC is a wonderful conceptual framework which marries all the good things and the virtues of social media, mobile, analytics, cloud, all the great things. And if you look back 20 years in time, we were actually doing some sort of SMAC without the social media. Just think of internet banking. I mean, that probably is the most pioneering example of how physical banks gave way to virtual banks. Citibank overnight had 15,000 more branches in a way when they launched their mobile app for the first time. So think of that as one example of the continuum. It started off by way of aggregating the workflow to the virtual world, and then evolving into a business model by injecting lots of other aspects of social media, analytics, and a few other elements that make it a sustainable business model. The biggest example I would say to think of for us, which is absolutely incredible and mind-boggling, is think of Uber. They don't even own a tire of a car. They own nothing.
Right.
Basically, they have smartly implemented the SMAC stack to a most happening business model globally. It's like in 120 countries, in the most remote corners of Latin America and Eastern Europe, you will see Uber working absolutely efficiently. And that's the greatest example of how the SMAC stack has led to Internet of Things to really create a sustainable business model and making it a money-making machine.
That is pretty.
And that's the biggest example I think of as SMAC being demystified into a real, tangible way of impacting the day-to-day life.
Absolutely. Dan?
So to the question of when do we start talking to suppliers about innovation and
Correct.
investments?
And you have right to talk smack to him. So
Oh, I
please.
can talk smack. I try never to talk smack to service providers. So we start really early in the process. We start when we think about when we're going to outsource something, what are our drivers? Sometimes it's really
Right.
a cost play. And honestly, the innovation plays a role there, but it's not as critical, right?
Okay.
It's infrastructure support. There's certain types of innovation, but it's not go-to-market type innovation. So we think about what are the sourcing drivers? Is it quality? Is it cost? Where it is innovation, where it is, those value-added go-to-market opportunities with suppliers, we build that into the sourcing, into the RFP process. We evaluate that. It's weighted at whatever weighting we decide to give it for that. And it's included then in our decision-making criteria of who we pick. And then in our negotiations throughout the whole process.
Who owns the intellectual property? Is it shared? Is it?
It depends on the situation.
Right.
So we will have some where we think it is very important to own it. Generally, it'll be shared, or sometimes we'll even give it to the supplier totally, depending on where it sits as far as what we're looking for in the market and competitiveness and that type of thing.
And that's built into the term sheets.
Yeah.
Keith?
For us, it really starts with the engagement with the client. When we're engaging on a project, it comes down to what's our scope. As a professional services firm, sometimes we do the design, sometimes we do the engineering, sometimes we do project management. So, some scope, some opportunities for scope lend itself more to the requirements for social, for example. As I mentioned earlier, if we're doing overall program management, we might be responsible for maintaining that portal to make sure that that commuters know what lane closures they might be facing on a day-to-day basis. So it's different in each project depending on the scope of our responsibility.
Great, thank you. Maybe we can spend the next 5 minutes or so talking about the future, talking about where do you think, in your opinion, SMAC is going to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now?
Sure. I think SMAC is already there for us. It is in some way manifested in the way we do our businesses. It is absolutely embedded in the business model of any enterprise that seeks to grow, that seeks to be competitive, that seeks to do what it is doing in a much better and smarter way. So the degree of adoption may vary from company to company, but at the minimum level, SMAC is there for all of us to kind of feed. Some great examples. I mean, how many of you shop in Nordstrom? They just had spectacular results a couple of weeks back for their last quarter. And one of the biggest factors in their upsurge on the revenues on some of their specific product lines was directly attributed to the investment, energy, effort they put on what they call as the social media-led outreach and campaign management. So what they did was they basically focused on Pinterest, the social media on Pinterest. So they picked up all the major visual cues in terms of the user opinion, user surveys, user feedback, and the user likes on Pinterest. How many are pinning Nordstrom specific products? So they ran some very sophisticated models in the back end. And at the end of it, they came up with a few product wares which they felt in specific demographic and geographical mix would be the best sellers. And using the Pinterest as visual cue, they basically flooded those products in all their major retail stores in those specific geographies, attracting those specific demographics. And lo and behold, actually they had spectacular revenue upsurge based on those specific point solution campaigns. And that's one great example of how social media drove very tangible revenue upsurge. And that's all about SMAC Stack really coming into play in helping shape its business. That's one great example. Same with Macy's. Macy's color determination for the next set of apparels, it all comes from the likes it gets on its homepage on the Facebook. So a lot of their success on the color and the combination of colors for the apparels is on the Facebook likes. Walmart, they run all their toys promotion based on all the user blogs and the visual clues and the semantic clues they generate out of these social posts. And they tell that publicly, that it's because of those very, very sophisticated models they run based on the data aggregation they do from these social outposts. Right. They actually help their products and their promotions and their outreach fine-tune and make more money.
Absolutely. Thank you. Danielle?
I can't even begin to imagine how differently we'll work, because how we work has changed so much in the last 5 years. So I'm looking forward to see how much different we all work as a result of SMAC. The one thing I do believe is that we won't be talking about SMAC. It'll be so integrated in what we do that we won't have to demystify it. We won't have to think about the case studies. It'll just be integrated really in the way that we all live and work. And
that's a good point. That's a very good point.
For Persons Brinckerhoff, as I mentioned a couple of times, we're not consumer facing. So I think for us, the opportunity with what the future looks like for us is some of the things that I've talked about. The knowledge sharing that will be enabled by types of social media, getting at the intelligence rather than expecting every bridge engineer to move to New York City. Having that person recruited where they want to live, giving them the tools to be able to do their job using mobile technologies. Even from the project sites, using analytics to be more successful in winning work. Cloud we haven't talked about, at least I haven't talked about much today as the C in SMAC, but a lot of our requirements are complicated by data residency. A lot of our projects are complicated by data residency. So we're still working on a semi-private hybrid cloud environment. Right. But I think the future for us encapsulates those things, having the knowledge sharing enabled by social media with the mobile workforce being able to do their job wherever they happen to live.
Thank you, Keith. I think we have, 5-10 minutes left. Maybe I could throw it up to the crowd. Any questions for our panel members, please? I see one. Is there someone back there? No. Boring, huh? Well, maybe I'll wrap this up and ask one last question to each panel member. Do you think organizationally this is a sort of the SMAC matrix is sort of a top line or a bottom line issue for you guys? Is it embedded into the whole revenue cycle, or is it an add-on?
All right. From a service provider perspective, we approach an enterprise based on our view on what I call it the budget as God, G-O-D. There are 3 stacks of budgets. G is growth budget, O is the obligation dollars, and D is discretionary. So from a service provider lens, SMAC is cutting across all 3. Companies need it for growth. Companies need to spend obligation dollar for SMAC to survive the business. Right. And it is also discretionary because you got to experiment a lot. Unless you experiment on a data-driven basis, it will remain a gut feel methodology company. Right. So you got to experiment with data. You got to engage service providers like us to help you create those sophisticated models to come up with better informed decisions.
Absolutely.
So for us, it's across all 3 budget lines.
That's a key driver. Thank you.
And for Microsoft, it really is very much both, right? Obviously, from a revenue perspective, it is a very critical part of our strategy, but also from a cost perspective. We haven't even talked about, the cost potential in moving things to the cloud, just the infrastructure, the other infrastructure cost. But also in the analytics and the social space, the process efficiencies, the time we're taking out of going to market, the investments we're not having to make or making differently. So it's very much on both sides.
Thank you. Thank you.
For us, I'd say it's reactionary, largely around the mobile workforce, but also from a cost perspective. We're a pretty low margin business, helping keep tax dollars low, but we're always trying to find ways to get more for the dollar. So I think it's mostly cost driven for us.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Any questions? I think, here we go. Got a gentleman right back there.
Analytics is specifically figuring these case studies.
Sure.
Anyone want to take?
Yeah, happy to take that. So from our perspective, social media is a great data input, data aggregation source for us to really understand, decode, demystify what the users and what the consumers are talking about the product or feeling about the product and articulating about the product or the service experience. So that's a great input for us. And one of the other channels through which we aggregate the data is from the mobile, in terms of surveys, in terms of anything that is activated by a device. And cloud basically, as you rightly said, is the medium around which all of this happens. So it's an ecosystem around which all of these transactions are made to happen. Where analytics come into play is basically pattern recognition from the signals. Typical example, I was talking to you about Nordstrom. All the major Pinterest clues were basically decoded into what could be what they call as semantic clues and visual clues. So you try to parse through the noise and figure out what are the keywords and what are the different types of feelings and emotions that are associated with the different types of user posts that come in from the social media. And then you run sophisticated models, which could be prescriptive or predictive, coming up with single variate or multivariate. So there are multiple different types of models that are applicable for different data sets. Whether it's a Monte Carlo simulation where you keep running the same data sets for different scenarios. So you come up with more actionable, informed opinion from these data sets through analytics. So analytics helps you to put some method to the madness. And that helps you basically drive your business decisions. Great example, I can talk Mount Sinai Hospital in New York here. So there, they have actually taken the SMAC adoption to a very different level. So they have social media, user experience coming in. All the patients, all the folks who have taken their next friends and family to the hospital, they talk about their experience. That's social media coming as input. Again, mobile devices help you to connect with what's going on the care management side for the patient, right? And then you have the cloud, which basically is an internet trans firewall where customers have access with passwords and usernames on what's happening to that patient and track it. So GE has come up with a device called Smart Tag, which Mount Sinai is adopting and implementing all over. So the Smart Tag really combines all of this into a very intelligent patient care system that takes in all these inputs from the user experience, connects it to the care management system, hospital management system, doctor-patient management system, inventory, bed availability, what's the shift utilization. All of these variables are crunched by sophisticated analytical models that drive the Smart Tag device. And that helps the hospital management to actually state that they can actually treat 10,000 more patients because of the adoption of Smart Tags. And that's nothing but a manifestation of SMAC with strong analytics under Internet of Things, where you have sensors and actuators powering these devices to collect the data and parse through them and come up with intelligent models. So that's really is one example I can talk about.
Thank you, Shiv. Anyone else want to add anything to that? Analytics. Any other questions? Oh, we have a question back there.
I'm just curious, someone who doesn't want to go through class, so just any thoughts about that?
Sure. It's a very good question. Daniel, John?
Well, I mean, we obviously, there's privacy we look at from a compliance and a legal system, and I think the cloud has matured a lot as have mobile and social applications and your ability to control and feel safe about putting your data in the cloud. So that was a big hurdle that the industry has been challenged with, that we're putting it in, that we've come up with some good solutions for. We, as far as the personal preferences, it does vary a lot from country to country. So there are often country laws that come into play as far as how you can structure those social interactions. We solve for that partly by having private groups and public groups. So I have, for the team that I work with, we have a closed group where it's a group of 10 people who collaborate together, and then there's all Microsoft level social. So it gives you some of that customization to tailor a little bit more with whom you're sharing what information, and to manage that and remove things if you don't like what's been shared.
And I have a more fundamental point on that particular aspect. Two things. Number one, social habits are irreversible. So much as we can talk about legislations, regulations, compliance, privacy, all that, it is going to be an ongoing saga, because as human civilization, our generation will always try to look for the best interests of our future generations. And that's why we'll come up with these checks and balances. Today, Millennium generation and Gen Y, which are the two generations which are the youngest in demographics, are the ones who are unleashing all of their creativity on the social media without any worry about what's going out from their side. But it's the baby boomers and Gen X who are really trying to be the conscience keepers here, trying to say that, guys, we got to have a sanity here and a little bit of checks and balance around what should go out, what should not go out. So that is going to be an ongoing civilizational, cycle, where the future generations will always be looked after by their parent generations. And that battle is going to go on. But social habits being irreversible means that a lot of what we talked about today are actually going to go absolutely out of control in any way. Because they do more good in terms of applicability and impact than some of the negative downsides which we keep talking about, and definitely we ought to be talking about, because it's important to keep that checks and balance.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Anyone else? Maybe we'll wrap up this panel. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you very much.